Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Wars Generations. We're going to have 20 seconds for recording of silence and then begin the actual episode. Hello and welcome to this special members-only episode of Star Wars Generations. To our members, thank you so much. You're the people who make this all possible. This is our June book club. It's coming out a couple of days late. I'm having COVID in the middle of the month, threw a bunch of things off. But today we're continuing the book club talking about the most recent book that came out in the High Republic series, a book that has actually probably a lot of implications, not only for how we understand the Force in general, for the history of the Jedi, for the history of so many things, but also for the TV show The Acolyte, which we'll be talking about towards the end. If you haven't seen Acolyte, don't worry. Spoilers will be at the end. But there's just so much in this book to talk about, including some pretty spicy scenes in ways that I had not expected from a Star Wars book. And we have with us returning guest, frequent guest, Danielle, written in the Star Wars. Danielle, how are we doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this book. It's become one of my favorite High Republic books, so looking forward to it.
Me too. And this podcast is for both the people who've read the book and the people who have not and are probably not going to get around to it. We want to kind of give you just kind of an overview of it. And there's so much to talk about. But Danielle, can you start by just giving, we don't need every plot point, but just kind of a general overview of what happens in this book?
Yeah, so this is the second adult novel of Phase 3 of the High Republic. So it picks up kind of right where Eye of Darkness, the first adult novel of Phase 3, left off. And where that is the galaxy is kind of divided. Markian Ro, the leader of the Nihil, the main antagonists of the High Republic, have cordoned off a section of the galaxy with something called the Storm Wall. And it's impossible for anyone outside of the Storm Wall who isn't a part of the Nihil to get through. And Eye of Darkness kind of dealt with the Jedi trying to figure out a way around that, how to save the people there, how to get them out. And Temptation of the Force has an answer to that. And we see the result of that. And our two of the main characters, Avar, Chris, and Elzar Mann, further their relationship, come to a further understanding of their relationship as they also come to a better understanding of the Storm Wall and Markian Ro and the Nihil as well. But there is, as always in the High Republic, a lingering threat that they had not expected that comes to be known by the wider galaxy. And I'll leave it there so as to not spoil anything for that summary.
So what is it you love about this book? What makes this one of your favorites? Because I know we've had a lot of, I don't think every book in the High Republic is the greatest, but a lot of them have been very good. And I think even the worst has been, quite enjoyable, a good read. What makes this one of your favorites?
I think it's because it focuses a lot on love. That's the main focus of the book, actually. And it's not just romantic love. It's really every iteration of love, both good and bad. And I think something that Tessa Gratton, the author of this book, said in their acknowledgments or their author's note at the end really summarizes it. And they say that when they were asked to write this book, when it was assigned to them, or however they work things out in Team Luminous with the High Republic, which is the authors who write for the book, that the powers that be told them to write this like The Empire Strikes Back. But that was too intimidating for them because that's their parents' favorite movie, and they couldn't really approach it that way because they had so much connected to that movie.
That makes me feel old, but okay, go on.
And so instead, they chose to write it about love. And I think it made me look at The Empire Strikes Back a little differently, because The Empire Strikes Back, I think, is also about love, not just between Han and Leia, but Luke coming to understand his love for his friends, and Leia coming to understand not just her love for Han, but for everything. And so I think in a way, like The Empire Strikes Back is about love. And so this book is like The Empire Strikes Back in that way.
Yeah.
And I love that about it, because it's not very often I mean, I think elements of love are woven through all Star Wars books because I think it's woven through all of Star Wars.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't focus on it as much. It doesn't really dive into it the way that this book does. And so I really appreciated that, getting to see the more emotional sides of these characters that we haven't really seen before.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it. And for me, as someone who has always been a little troubled by the Jedi idea of attachment and the fear of that, as presented primarily in the prequels, but also in a lot of the other content, I really loved that this is taking a very different perspective. And
Mhm.
I think it's what we spend, not all the time, there's a lot to talk about here, but at least some of today talking about is what is this idea of love and attachment like? Because there is a romance at the heart of this book, and it is two Jedi for each other. And it's a kind of Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss. And this is one of the things that was established early in the books that we talked about a little bit before, was this kind of idea that, like, they're very coy about it, but I think the best way I can say is that, like, Padawans are expected to play doctor. Like, there's kind of an expectation that, like, Padawans are gonna have hormones and explore things with each other, but that when they become Jedi Knights, they mostly set that aside. And Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss are two people who really had that, and those feelings for each other have really lingered. And both of them had come to believe that that was bad, and that they have both separated and pulled away from each other. And a lot of this book is about them coming back to each other, finding that for them, as they understand it, their connection to the Force is strengthened by their being together, and living out what that love looks like. And as I said, some language that is, I mean, if you're an AO3 reader, this is still very much on the, like, vanillest to vanilla sides. But for a Star Wars novel, it was pretty spicy. Um, and I was listening to it on tape, and there's a lot of description of what's going through Avar Kriss's mind as she kisses him, and as it becomes more passionate, and her hands are running over him, being read by this narrator, and it just was like, I could have shifted to reading that part. I think that would have been a little more comfortable. Other people may love this, but for me, I think having smut read to me is not what I want. But putting that aside, I think the main point is that they really kind of, it seems like both of them come to this idea that it is possible to love each other, and that loving each other isn't bad, because it's possible for them to love each other without it becoming an attachment in the way that they have been taught is problematic. Do you think that's a good summary of it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that one thing I would challenge on there, which this is something you and I do a lot, is when it comes to attachment, talking about attachment, I think, is
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't seem as much of a taboo. I think that for for them, it's maybe not so much something they're taught, but what they're afraid of, kind of. And I
Yeah, I think
think
that's a
that
better way of putting it.
that's why Avar is so much quicker to once she decides that she realizes that she does love Elzar and that she wants something from it, she's quicker to be able to accept that because she has already accepted what that means to her and what
Right,
attachment means to her and what love means to her and how those two are different. But Elzar takes longer to get there because he has pulled from the dark side before. He has
hmm,
used it and he has seen what his emotions can do when they get the better of him. He's
right,
killed somebody because of it. He's touched the dark side because of it. And so for him, what he knows about the dangers of attachments, he has seen play out in his life. And so
right,
I think that's why it takes him longer to kind of accept that in this book because he doesn't want I think he doesn't want the pure love that he feels for Avar to be tainted by what he's seen happen to him with attachments before.
yeah,
And or with well, and that's another thing talking about attachments that I wanted to touch on is that for a long time I've always viewed that, obviously love and attachment are very different things in Star Wars. I think they were always meant to be. And but we never really had language for that in canon. And I
Right.
think Temptation of the Force gave us that language that we
Yes,
needed in
very much
canon.
so.
Because you can explain it as a fan all day long, but unless it's in canon, really, some people are like, well, I'm not entirely sure that that's what they mean. But hearing Yoda say it even was a
Yeah.
huge thing. And Avar and Elzar, and the fact that they could kiss each other in front of other Jedi, and the Jedi aren't like scandalized,
Hmm.
and I that's what I appreciate most from this book, I think, is that it gave us that language to use and say, no, there is a difference here. There has always
Right.
been a difference here. Um, whether they forget that by the time we get to the prequels is another question. Whether and
Right.
why. Yeah.
Yeah, I think having it come from Yoda specifically was so important. Elzar
Yeah.
goes to Yoda because he's not sure about it. And, you know, Yoda does this very good job of, he doesn't specifically say, yeah, you and Navar should go bone. What he says is, and to be clear, it's very clear they sleep together. They don't just
Yeah.
kiss. Um, and I think that's, again, very intentionally done. What Yoda kind of says is, look, he really talks about this idea of love and that we can love with attachment. And when Elzar kind of wants Yoda to give him this exact answer of, is this thing with Avar okay? And Yoda doesn't do it, but Yoda basically says, like, as long as you're choosing love, you're making the right choice. And
Yeah.
even says that he has had the same, wrestlings.
Hmm.
And it was just such a beautiful scene. And I didn't get a chance to do this, unfortunately, because I got busy this morning, but it made me want to go back and watch the scenes where Anakin is talking to Yoda
Yeah.
in Attack of the Clones, because that feels so different. And
Yeah.
this may well actually be a future episode. I think it'd be really interesting to compare, like, Elzar Mann has a lot in common with Anakin Skywalker, and I think that is, again, somewhat intentional. And I'd be very interested to see, like, why does Yoda have that difference, and is it about because Yoda has changed over that time, or is it because Yoda thinks that Elzar can do this in a way that he does not believe that Anakin does? And certainly Anakin isn't even talking about, like, avoiding attachment. But yeah, so I'm sort of saying, like, it's something I want to think about more that I haven't had a chance to think about, but I think we're supposed to be thinking about that in this book, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of it has to do with honesty. Um,
Hmm.
Elzar has never one thing I will give him credit for is, and I love Elzar, so I give him credit for a lot of things, but I think this is unbiased credit, is that he has not once shied away from what he has done.
Yeah.
And he has always been honest about what he's done ever since the Rising Storm, or not
Yeah.
the Fallen Star. Ever since the Fallen Star, he has been completely honest about what he's done.
And now
And
I'm going to break in a minute just to remind people, or for those who haven't read
okay.
that, what he did. Um, so at the beginning of uh, the High Republic books, there's the creation of this space station that is meant to be it's all about the Republic and the Jedi together, kind of making their way out into the Outer Rim and trying to say, like, look, we are the Jedi. We are here to help you. We are all the Republic, as the Chancellor keeps saying. And in the Fallen Star, that space station, which is it's called, like, the Beacon, I think.
Starlight Beacon.
Starlight Beacon. Thank you. It's very much the symbol of all the good that is happening, and the Nile destroy it. And most of that book is about the ongoing battle to see if they can save it or not. And at one point, there's a situation where someone who has been on the side of the Nile, who has been doing a lot of terrible things, including helping to kill some of the people and endanger the people who Elzar, loves the most, and that he finds that person and kills her. And he's very clear about that. He's not doing it in the kind of, like, this person is a threat to life. This person is a threat to goodness. It's because this is the person who harmed the people he loved and is continuing to put them in danger. And so it's coming more out of, I think you could argue, like, attachment, or the
Mm-hmm.
the idea of that your personal feelings about other people are influencing how you're supposed to act, which I think is the danger
Yeah.
of attachment.
Yeah.
And he kills her, and that alone I think would be bad enough, but he realizes later that in that moment, probably not for the most altruistic of reasons, to save her own skin, but she is trying to save Starlight Beacon herself. And that
She
by
was the only
killing
one who
her,
could have done it at that point.
exactly, and that the sort of third person of the very close friendship, Stellan Geos, who Elzar and Avar were both very close to, who, by the way, I love the way they write him, because this is a great description of that the third wheel is nonsense. And you can be very good friends with two people who have romantic love for each other and sexual tension with each other and still be a wonderful connection among the three of you, which I just absolutely love that part. But yeah, and so Elzar, not only does he recognize that he kind of drew upon the dark side and acted out of attachment, but then instead of doing so, he killed one of the people who and now kind of his attachment to the person he killed is continuing to haunt him and all of this. So yeah, go on. I just want to really make sure people understand what it was he did.
Yeah, of course, that is important. Thank you for that. Yeah, so he's always been honest about that. He doesn't lie about it after it happens. He's honest with Avar about it. He's honest with the council about it, which we see in um, Temptation of the Force. Is it takes him a while to be honest with them about it, but they offer him a seat on the council. And it's important to note that this seat is vacant because it was Stellan's seat. And Stellan is no longer there to claim that seat, and they offer it a year later to Elzar, and Elzar realizes he can no longer keep this to himself, and he has to be honest about it, and so he tells them, and they have a really, what I think is a really beautiful discussion with the council about how he should feel he's feeling shame, and that in itself is a good thing, because it means that he regrets it, and it means that he didn't want to do it, and if he had the opportunity to go back and not do it, he would. And so they acknowledge that, and they encourage him to acknowledge that, and they also discuss, we're not perfect either, like essentially saying like no one on this council hasn't accidentally killed somebody, which is kind of funny, but also I think was a good thing for Elzar to hear, and I think went a long way in helping him heal from that. And to get back to my point about the difference between him and Anakin, is that Anakin was always so afraid to be honest, and I don't know how much of that came from, he was always kind of an outsider in the order, how much he just felt like he couldn't be honest with people because he was raised a different way. And he did come to the order later, so he already had like, this, I think probably like imposter syndrome on him as well. He had the chosen one prophecy hanging over his head. There were a lot of expectations for him, and so I'm not saying it's as black and white as Anakin just decided to not be honest, but he wasn't honest when he could have been. And I think we're seeing the difference that honesty makes through Elzar being honest and not hanging on to that, and kind of accepting this advice and help when it's given to him. And it does make you wonder how might things have been different if Anakin had been able to do that, and if he had felt like he could do that.
Yeah. And I think that the sort of those two things are where you and I differ somewhat, because I fully agree about that, but for me, I look at it more as if Anakin had been given the opportunity to be honest.
That's what I mean. Like if he had felt like he could be honest with them as well.
Exactly.
I
think that's exactly right. And I also think though that the age is important, because Elzar is talking about all of the feelings he had for Avar. It's a little confusing with the names, Elzar and Avar. And then there's also an Avon, which I'm just like, guys, come up with some other like sounding names. Who spends a lot of time with Elzar as well. But the point being, Elzar, at the time all this is happening, he's a grown man. He's in his 30s, probably maybe even older than that. Anakin's 19.
Yeah.
And Alex Corman, my normal host, will probably listen to this and be like, oh my God, Matthew's defending Anakin. I don't mean to be doing that by any means. But I think that that's also another part of it, is I've always felt, not necessarily from Padme's side, but that the Anakin-Padme romance is meant to be kind of a Romeo and Juliet, as in like, oh, those crazy kids, they have no idea what they're doing, and that for Elzar and Avar, part of it also and why it works is that this is a much more mature kind of love. And like they
Yeah.
both have grown into themselves as Jedi. They both have learned to live with themselves as Jedi by themselves
Hmm.
and been okay with it, but also realized that they were holding back on a part of their lives that they didn't have to.
I think they also have they have such a deep friendship. Their friendship comes first. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that was so important in them being able to be honest with each other about their feelings and not have any expectations hang over them. Because when Avar says that she will accept whatever he does or doesn't want to do, whatever he does or doesn't want to admit to with his feelings, she means it. It's enough for her to tell him that she loves him and to
Yeah.
know that he knows that she loves him. Um, you get the sense that maybe she knows him well enough to know that he'll get there eventually. So that's might be why she doesn't. She's not all that bothered when he literally runs away from her. When she
Mm-hmm.
kisses him, funniest scene, by the way. I died laughing so
It's so
hard.
good.
It's like Avar, you lose, or not Avar, Elzar, you loser. But uh, their friendship is so strong that both of them know that something like that, Avar's not going
Mm-hmm.
to take offense to. And
Yeah.
something like that, Elzar's not going to stay away forever. And so there's not really any room for him to have the kind of like, all encompassing jealousy and kind of like possessiveness that Anakin gets because
Mm-hmm.
he doubted so much that people did care about him the way he cared about them. There's none of that there with Elzar and Avar.
Yeah.
And I think that was really refreshing to see that they could have such an open and honest communication.
Like there are moments when Elzar talks about that, he clearly recognizes that Avar is a very strikingly attractive lady, and he notices other people noticing her, and it's not like he's kind of just proud of it, like not in a possessive like, oh, that's my woman, but just like, yeah, she's amazing and people should notice her. And there's no confidence lack. And compare that to the way Anakin goes, you know, pure like red flag boy in the Clone Wars. Anytime Padme is with like this senator who she kind of grew up with, or like any of those other people. The other thing, though, I want to say, I totally agree with you that Elzar's actions there, like the scene is written in a funny way, but I also really loved it because this is getting better.
Yeah.
But for me, growing up as a young man, part of the things that I've learned is that as a man, I am supposed to want sex any and every time it is offered to me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of like unpacking my own toxic masculinity has been unpacking that specifically. And so to have a female character specifically express sexual interest and openness, and the male character be the one to say, "I'm not really ready for this. I think we need to slow down." It's funny, and I'm not saying it's bad that it's funny at all. I think that's good, but it also to me felt really like healing and powerful because we're getting more of that, but we still don't get nearly enough.
Oh yeah, I want to clarify that it was purely the running away.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally
That
fair.
I was
That's totally
like,
fair.
because the way it happens is just he's just like I have to go, and then he sprints
Yeah.
off, and I was like, that's a little bit because Elzar is very you're right in that he is more mature and he is older, he has more experience than Anakin did. But at heart, Elzar is very much like a 19-year-old boy who is still trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out who he is and what he wants. And or at least for most of the High Republic, he's that way. I think we see the maturation in Phase 3
Yeah.
much more than in Phase 1 for good reason. But there's still moments where that little boyish this comes
Mm-hmm.
out, and I definitely saw that in the I'm not gonna tell you I'm not ready for this. I'm just gonna hightail it out of here. And I
Yeah.
loved that. So because it was also very like in character for him. Like it made sense.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, oh my God, Elsa, I can't believe you just
It
did
was
that,
so
but I also
perfect.
can.
I think honestly a lot of the best humor in the book comes between them, and because again it feels so real. One
Yeah.
of my favorite lines is when part of what they've always talked about, I think we've talked about before, is that they have different understandings of the Force, but they're somewhat complementary. And that
Yes.
she experiences the Force as music, and he experiences it as an ocean, as water. And she's kind of teasing him. She's like, well, planets like Tatooine, they don't get any water. There's no oceans there, but they have music. Even the Nile have music. And it was just such a great, like, yeah, like people who are in love needle each other. That, like, it can be very, we've all seen, or hopefully not, but often been in relationships where it becomes kind of a toxic, like, insulting culture, but that's not what this is. This is clearly very loving and understanding.
Yeah, I
Then,
also liked how in the same vein, when she's like kind of teasing him about that, they talk about how the way they see the Force is so complementary and how
mhm,
it actually works together because you have like the tide of the ocean is also music,
yeah,
and how that works with the way that Stellan was their pole star. They see him as the stars in the galaxy in the sky, and how that all kind of works together. I thought that was really beautiful, and so some funny moments tied into really really truly like beautiful metaphors.
yeah.
I really appreciated that.
Let me talk about the writing for a bit, because I wonder if you had more trust in it than I did, but they definitely do a kind of will they, won't they for a lot of this book, which I think sometimes can be enjoyable. It's a trope that I've kind of been a little burned out on, but especially when, for me at least, a part of me was thinking, is this book going to wind up telling us that Elzar and Avar were wrong to go this
Mhm.
far and that something bad will happen? So when Avar declares his feelings and then Elzar runs, and they kiss a couple times, and then Elzar runs, uh, and then they go off on separate missions together.
Yeah.
No, actually, they kind of don't acknowledge their feelings, but are kind of both playing that kind of game of like flirting chicken with each other. And then they don't kiss, and then they go off on separate missions. And I was like, oh
Mhm.
God, don't let one of them die. Then they come back and they have that scene and they kiss, and I was like, yes, yes. Oh God, Elzar, no. And then they go off on separate missions again, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
my God, no. And then they do finally have this moment of fully acknowledging and then living out their love together. And then Avar, forgive me, here's a spoiler towards the end of the book. Avar is very badly wounded and kind of experiences death for a moment or two.
Yeah.
And I was so angry. I was going to be like, okay, after watching so many shows where the teenage girl has sex for the first time and then her boyfriend either becomes a vampire or a monster or dies, are you telling me we're doing the same thing with the Jedi? We didn't, happily, and she lived, but again, like, were you kind of on the edge of your seat, or sometimes like a little bit afraid that was going to happen, or did you have more trust in the authors than I did?
I hmm. Let me think about this for a second because it was a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tessa Gratton is like, first of all, the best person they could have chosen from their current slate of authors to write this type of story.
Mm-hmm.
I think, um, and so in that note, I had no doubt that the ending would feel earned, regardless of what it
Mm-hmm.
was. So that alleviated a little bit of my fears. But I was
Mm-hmm.
also still like, are they going to say that this is wrong? Like when Elzar
Yeah.
tells Yoda, like Elzar straight up tells Yoda that Avar told him that she loved him. And I was like, why would you do that? What are you
Yeah.
doing? You're admitting to this. He's going to kick you out of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he didn't. It's completely surprised all of us. So it went for a complete 180 and was like, let's discuss these feelings. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of fear there of like, they're going to get found out. Or like when
Yeah.
Avar kisses Elzar in front of like Vernestra and Bryaga and Belle. I was like, "What are you doing?"
Mm-hmm.
But it was fine, and so the more that those things happened, the more I was like, "Okay, this is a different
Yeah.
experience than what we've seen before. Maybe it will be okay." And just the fact that so much of this book was about, I'd say, Elzar's understanding of love. Elzar's coming to understand what love is and what it isn't. Which I think Anakin only ever got to do at the end. I don't know if Anakin ever really got to have that understanding for himself of what love is and isn't,
Right.
and that love should make you stronger and not weaker, not like succumb to these emotions that take you over.
Right.
It shouldn't take you over, it should just bolster you up. And Elzar came to that realization of it. And so the more I came to understand that that was what the main focus of the book was, the more I was like, I think it's going to be okay.
Hmm.
But I was with you, like, up until the last page, I was like, "Are they gonna do something to, like, make it?" Like, I thought that at the end, Elzar was gonna have been, like, realized, like, after Avar almost died, I thought he was gonna distance himself from her.
Yeah.
Um, he would come to the realization that's too much, that when she almost died, he felt like he was gonna, like, damn the galaxy the way that we know Anakin does. But he didn't. And I was
Yeah.
like, this is a really nice, like, breath of fresh air to have that version of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. And for me, the three moments that most concerned me, one, when I think the book tells you that she kind of does die for a second, and
Yeah,
like there's this moment in her mind where she feels like she has become one with the Force,
yeah,
one with the galaxy, and she can just let go.
yeah.
I literally said, "Don't you fucking dare let go."
I
I was
know.
so mad. But then later, I think you're right that he could have had. What I actually thought was going to happen though was that because later representatives of the Nile come and speak to them and have some really harsh conversations, two different ones. I'm not going to spoil who it was because it's very important for the plot. I thought Elzar was just going to cut one of them down
Yeah,
because at that point he doesn't. The first one at least he doesn't know if Avar is going to live. I
mhm,
thought that was going to be his like, nope, attachment is going to take him to the dark side.
yeah,
And you're right. It was really refreshing. It didn't happen.
yeah.
Let me ask this then, um, because I think it has been made clear that not only by Anakin's time, but by Obi-Wan's time, this understanding is no longer there. And while I think we can compare Elzar to Anakin, in some ways, I feel like the better comparison maybe even is Obi-Wan, who apparently when he was young, but also as an adult, and as a mature, someone closer to Elzar's age than Anakin's, is faced with his feelings for Sabine and how he just can't, no, Satine, sorry,
Satine, yeah.
is faced with his feelings for Satine and that he can't let himself. And to me, there's two very important things here that show that because I think it'd be easy to say, oh, Obi-Wan just doesn't trust himself that he can have this love without attachment. But first of all, in those scenes in the Clone Wars TV show, he specifically says, I would have left the order for you.
Yeah.
And to me, it's done in a way where he doesn't believe that he could stay in the order and love her.
Mhm.
And then also, if you've read the book Padawan, which is part of the Disney canon, it is very canonical. In it, he is in this community with a bunch of young people who are kind of in a free love situation,
Mhm.
and he feels like he wishes he could go off and make out in the woods with one of them. And by the way, he does say this about people of both
Yeah.
of numerous genders, which is its own like canonically bi or pan or however you want to describe it. Um, but also even then he feels like he's not allowed to just make out with someone. Um, and so for me, what I'm getting at is that to me, like by Obi-Wan, like by Obi-Wan's time, this has already changed, and part of me
Mhm.
wonders, like, do you think Obi-Wan could have had this kind of non-attachment love with Satine?
Hmm. I don't know. I feel like it's different. It's difficult for me to say because Elzar and Avar are both Jedi. And
Mm-hmm.
so they come to their understanding of love and their expectations of each other from a very similar perspective. They both know what the other can offer and what the other can't. Um,
Mm.
without like what the other can't without risking themselves and the entire galaxy because of their powers. Um, and I also think, like, I know we have Kanan and Hera, but I think Hera
Mm.
understood that because Hera, though she wasn't a Jedi, was also a leader and
Right.
a leader of the rebellion. And she couldn't make certain promises because her priority was the rebellion. And just like Kanan's priority and every Jedi's priority is to the Force, uh, you know, I think she had a similar understanding as him of what they could and could not promise each other. And I don't know that Obi-Wan and Satine could ever have had that same
Yeah.
understanding. And so on a general perspective of like, I want to say that like if they could have, then yes, but I also don't know if they would have been attracted to each other if they could. Because they were like almost polar opposites, and that is what
Hmm.
attracted them to each other. And so I
Yeah.
don't know if they ever could have had that understanding with each other that we see with Kanan and Hera and now Elzar and Avar.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do think that you're right that attitudes about it had shifted a bit by that point. Um, or if it's not so much maybe attitudes as it is Elzar had to be honest about it. It's clearly not something they're taught. Like,
Yeah.
even during the High Republic time, there clearly it isn't a class about how to love without attachment. But so I guess I don't know. I think in Obi-Wan and Satine's situation, as much as I love them together and I love his love for her, I love her love for him. It's one of those things that I don't know if it would have
Yeah.
worked without him stepping away from the order.
Yeah. And I'll say that I think you're right about Kanan and Hera being different in part because Hera's so different, but also I think it should be said Kanan's dealing with his own internalized fears of attachments and things like that, but he doesn't have a Jedi Order to deal with.
Yeah.
Like there is no Jedi Order that's going to kick him out. The only other
There were no
Jedi
expectations. Yeah.
the only other good side Force user he's spending time with is Ahsoka,
Yeah.
who's very clear about like I'm not going to force the Jedi rules on you. I'm not a Jedi. So I think we could spend our entire time talking about these two, and frankly, I wish the author had cut out some of the other plot lines and just talked about these two. But that's an issue I kind of have with the High Republic books in general is that there are many, many plot lines. But let's talk about some of the others.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about Denial and what we see them doing in this book.
Yes.
By the way,
So
also I just want to say, if you hear us pronouncing the name of that group different ways, Nihil, Neil, it's because the different people who are doing the official audiobooks of it pronounce it differently. So it's just kind of an inside joke at this point that no one knows how to pronounce it.
yeah. So an interesting thing that I'm really glad that they touched on because the Nile are like, they have their name for a reason, nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of like thrive off of this presumed like anarchy and things like that. An interesting question going into phase 3 after they have essentially won at the end of phase 1 with destroying Starlight Beacon, destroying the great symbol of unity and hope in the galaxy, is what is next? Like, what's Marky and Rowe going to do next? Like, he's already done this to them. He's already proven that he can kill Jedi very easily without even having to do it himself. And when they introduced the storm wall, they introduced another interesting question of what does a leader of nihilism do when he is forcing them into essentially like he has to govern them because you can't
Mm-hmm.
just cordon off a section of space and just let everyone like run like havoc everywhere. There has to be something. There has to be something, and I think that Marky and Rowe, the leader of the Nile, was not prepared for that. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
care about that. He doesn't care about leading people. He doesn't care about governing them. He just wants to stir chaos. He wants
Yeah.
power. And so that's like probably the most interesting question they had to approach for phase 3. And I think they've done it very well because he's bored. As we've
Yeah.
seen from the Eye of Darkness on, he's bored. He doesn't know what to do anymore. He doesn't care. He does have a governing body set up, kind of, but he doesn't care what they do. He's just like, why are you boring me with all these things?
Mm-hmm.
And I won't lie, in Eye of Darkness, I was kind of like, this isn't the Marky and Rowe that I'm used to. Like, he's bored, so he gets a little boring. And I think that was
Yeah.
intentional so that in Temptation of the Force, they could remind us when he finds his purpose again.
Yeah.
When he is like, oh, you took down the storm wall for a little while. I don't care about that. I'm off here finding out how I'm going to wreak havoc on the galaxy next.
Yeah.
And I was terrified of him again because I
Yeah.
was terrified of him in the first couple of books of phase 1. And in Eye of Darkness, I wasn't so much terrified of him anymore. But Temptation of the Force, I was like, oh yeah, there's Markian Rowe. He just needed something to get up off his butt
Hmm.
and go wreak havoc again. So
In this version of Martian reminds me a lot of Heath Ledger's version of the Joker in The
mm,
Dark Knight. Because it is very much that, some people just want to watch the world burn. That's quite literally what
yeah,
he wants. And
yeah,
it's funny because you said, like, he's kind of established a sort of pseudo government, but some of the people who are under him are kind of like, no, 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 we want to. They're kind of more the Jack Nicklaus Joker, from the Michael Keaton 80s movie of Batman. I promise I'll stop making Batman references now. But, they want to establish, like, this as an empire, and they want to rule, and they want to have diplomatic relations with the Republic and all this kind of thing. And yeah, he has no interest in that. And so I think the double story we're seeing is what he gets to do off on his own, but also what is kind of happening when he's in, because they are now sort of figuring out, instead of just like constantly waiting for his orders, they're just kind of doing their own thing. And so now
yeah,
I think we're going to get the situation later in the books where it's kind of a double enemy, that there
yeah,
is the Nile themselves, and then there's Martian, and that some of the Nile are probably going to follow him, and some of them are going to be much more like, no, we just want to rule. We don't want to, like, if you destroy everything, that's going to destroy us too. And we don't want that.
yeah. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because you already see the splinters in this book because you have Garrus Staros, who um, he was a Republic senator and turned coded to Markian and the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of the ones who wants to like establish a government and establish this empire, like you said, for her own power and her own security and everything. And there are Nihil who are following her
Yeah.
and who are loyal to her before they're loyal to Markian Rowe, secretly, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting that there were some of them who joined and who are recognizing that the way that Markian is going forward is no longer safe for them. Like
Right.
they're dying left and right still, and they have all this power, all this control, and they're still like they're not safe. They can't build a life off of that. And maybe some of them do want to build a life off of that, or at least don't want to have to look over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. And
Right.
Gira promises that more than Markian can.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really interesting that you're not just seeing the fracture of the Republic, you're seeing the fracture of the Nihil as well.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes and whether Markian will be able to keep up with what he's currently doing uh, without the full backing of his Nihil like he had before.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see where that goes. And I also love how it actually plays in directly to the story we've been talking about love and attachment,
Yeah.
in a way that influences Elzar directly, and he's the one to kind of comment on it, but also I think helps remind us that this isn't just a struggle that the Jedi face, because that the person who's kind of the main diplomatic representative to the Republic from the Nile, she has a daughter. And at one point, she's willing to let her love for her daughter and her concern for her daughter, kind of like completely validate the actual daughter's wants, which I think is very much kind of the definition of that selfish love of, like, I want you in my life. I don't care about your interests and what
Mhm.
you want. But also, she winds up betraying Martian in
Yeah.
order to have a chance to be closer to her daughter, and very intentionally. And this is what Elzar notices and comments on. Chancellor So, who is kind of like she's the chancellor. She's been sort of one of the main non-force using representatives throughout this, and is a fascinating character all of her own. Her son is still trapped in Nile space, in the occlusion zone, as it's called, and she has a chance to perhaps put her needs as a mother and the needs of her son ahead of the needs of the Republic, and she flat out refuses to do so. And
Yeah.
it's, I think, a very clear difference of, like, she can love her son without letting that love corrupt her and what she's supposed to do, in a way that her counterpart from the Nile very much cannot.
Yeah. Yeah, and it works out like on both ends, like for the Republic essentially, because Gira not being able to do that is a plus for the
Mm-hmm.
Republic because it helps them. But the scenes with Gira and her daughter Avon were so beautiful Like some of the most gut-wrenching lines I thought, especially the one where they're talking about, how Gira is like, "If I do what you want me to do, like, I'll be killed. Like, I could be killed. Like, do you want me to
Mhm.
risk my life?" And, like, "Would you rather be proud of me or would you rather me be dead?" And a few pages later, before they part ways, Avon says, "I'd rather be proud of you, Mom." And,
Yeah.
the, like, because it doesn't happen immediately after they have that discussion, it's a few pages later, and, uh, and so, like, I felt like I could feel that in my gut, that line of,
Yeah.
like, "I would rather you be dead than me have to live with being ashamed of you and
Yeah.
ashamed of the actions you've taken." And I was like, "No wonder Gira," like, that got through to her because I was like, "I'm not even her mother." And I was like, "Oh my god, if someone ever said that to me, I would be like, oh, like, questioning my all of my choices my entire life." Um,
Mhm.
and I thought that that was, like, really, really well done. And
Yeah.
I was really happy to see, like, Avon have that, you know, control, I think, over herself. She's so young, she's 15, but she's a genius. She saves the galaxy
Mhm.
essentially. Um, but to have her like be able to stand up for herself in that way to her mother when she's felt like she never really has been able to before.
Yeah. No, I think that's so powerful, and it also this is much further back in the both the chronology, but also in the timeline of the books we've read. But back in Phase Two, there was another chancellor who was a mother
Mhm.
who also had a situation like this, and in her case, she decided just to resign her position so that she could simply be a mother and not face these kind of things. It would be nice if a father faced something some point in these books, but we'll see where that goes. So far,
Yeah.
our main representation of fatherhood is Anakin Skywalker, who's not
Oh
the best
god.
necessarily. Um, we've talked a lot about love. I think though that very intentionally this book talks about two primary emotions that the Jedi can experience. One is love, the other is fear.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
because we're continually we've already been introduced to them, but we see much more dramatically the effects of the levelers, or the nameless as they're called by the Jedi, these creatures that can evoke incredible amounts of fear. And of course, that was always, one of the things Yoda said was, "Fear is the path. Fear leads to suffering. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads, whatever the exact order
Mhm.
is." But and that there's a couple of times where he talks about that fear is one of the fastest paths to the dark side. And here we see a lot of Jedi giving into their fear. I mean, not intentionally out of some character weakness, but because they're being utterly overwhelmed by these dark side creatures.
Yeah.
And yet all of them, even like one of them, is able to kind of like lean into his fear and use that for empathy to focus on the fear of others, and it helps him.
Yeah.
What do you think about how the way fear was explored in this?
I thought it was really interesting because the way that Buryaga, the Wookiee Jedi of the High Republic, the way that he approaches this, I was like, because I was having the same thought when he was like giving into the fear of others. I was like, "Oh, path to dark side, Buryaga, don't, don't go dark side,
Mm-hmm.
don't go dark side." But he didn't, and it's right because he's he's an empath essentially.
Yeah.
He feels others' feelings much more. Is a heightened awareness of feelings than most Jedi. And we've seen this since phase one, when he was able to help save a bunch of people in one of the first big attacks that we read about, because he can feel them, he can feel their fear. And so this was a nice tie-in to that, but also really interesting exploration of how to use fear for good,
Mm-hmm.
um, and not by ignoring it, not by overcoming it, but by accepting it. I think, and the way that he did that was like, I don't know, it was a little confusing for me at first. I was like, "What are you doing exactly?" But like you said, by him focusing on using his empathy to feel that fear fully and letting it have his deep feeling of empathy protect
Yeah.
was really interesting because it is a way of showing like, your deep rooted desire to protect someone and it coming out in a positive way instead of a toxic way, like we see
Mm-hmm.
with Anakin sometimes. Um, so yeah, I think that fit in really well with the channeling these feelings that we're so often taught are bad for the Jedi or negative for the Jedi,
Yeah.
and using them instead for overwhelming good.
Yeah, I mean, even the Jedi Code specifically has a line that says there is no emotion, there is only peace.
Yeah.
And Avar and Elzar do not have peaceful feelings towards each other. I mean, like, I don't mean that they have like aggressive, but like, it's not like just a calm. There's passion there, and there's fear, and there's all these emotions that Jedi are dealing with, and so yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like this is the best we've ever seen the Jedi, but of course, if at a later point this isn't what the Jedi are like, there's a part of me that's just like, okay, so when's the other shoe going to drop?
Yeah, I was going to say
what
that.
are we going to see?
I'm scared.
Yeah, me too.
I'm like, I genuinely am like, I've been saying for a while that like, or not for a while, but since last week on the Acolyte that I am like, I think phase 3 so far has coddled us too much, because phase 1 was just rip your heart out, don't get too attached, like constant reminder that everybody's gonna die. But phase 3 has been overwhelmingly so far really hopeful and really loving and careful, and like, I don't want to say quiet, because a lot of action happens in these books, especially in Temptation of the Force. But on a relative scale compared to phase 1, it's been quiet and a nice break, I think, from the like emotional damage of phase 1. But it can't end happily. Like, I mean, we know it can't end happily. Maybe some of our favorite characters won't die, but I just don't see a like truly happy ending for this because of what we know it's leading to. So I'm a little scared. It might be like a superficially happy ending, but deep down I'll know.
I mean, I will say that giving nothing away, the last couple lines of the book are some of the scariest I've ever read in any Star Wars property. So we'll definitely see where it goes.
Yeah.
Any other things in the book you wanted to comment on? We're going to do a spoiler section at the end. We're going to talk specifically about the Acolyte, and because I do think that this influences some things we know about the Acolyte. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen the Acolyte yet. But anything else you want to talk about before then?
I think just that I didn't notice it really while we were reading it, but afterwards, is that this is the first time we get Buryaga's POV in a book. And I thought it was used really well. I got to interview Tessa Grattan, actually, and they said that they loved being able to do Buryaga's POV, but found out why it's so difficult to do the POV of a Wookiee. And I can only assume it's because you can't have them speaking. You can have their internal thoughts, but when it comes to dialogue with other people, you either have to explain it and not have the dialogue, or have someone else speak for them. And I understood that, but I thought that was really interesting. And I just think it's so fun to have a Wookiee POV. I'm glad that we got that.
Yeah, I really feel the same. I'm going to have more to say about that later. I think for me, the only last comments I have is, oh God, what's coming right out of my brain? Give me 3 seconds. Marcion, about the nope, I got nothing. I'll have to redo that. No, I think that's great, and I think, like I said, there's so much more we can talk about with this book. There's so much that happens. Actually, no, I know. Let me close then, actually, by asking you about the character that we've talked about before, and I will say I feel a little bit more vindicated about Porter Ingalls.
Porter Ingalls.
Because I remember the last time we talked about it, I talked about how he had, at one point in the book, kind of gotten this place where he decided that people needed to die. And I thought that was a little dark-sidey, and I know you pushed back on that some. In this book, he at one point just flat out says, I'm not interested in what the rest of the Jedi want to do. I just want to go and kill this person who has done these terrible things. Oh, oops, hold on, sorry.
Okay.
And we get numerous times from his POV. Sorry, I have microphone troubles. And we get numerous times from his. Come on. There we go. And we get numerous times from his POV this idea that he wants to kill her. He's not interested in capturing her. He's not interested in like if she. Oh my god! All right, let me try this one more time.
Take your time. It's okay.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Do the whole thing one more time so the mic's in the right place. And we get numerous times from his perspective that he just wants to kill her. He's not interested in trying to capture her. He's not interested in trying to take her prisoner. He wants to kill her. He thinks she should be dead. Where do you see him now?
I still am backing up what I've said, because there is something that Avar says when she's confronted with this. She's the one that he tells, I have to go off. It has to be me and her. And she thinks to herself, and I don't know how much this was an excuse, and she thinks also, she doesn't know if that's just what she wants to believe or if it really is, that it does feel like balance to her, because it's him and it's her. It's Porter and it's General Weiss. And they have a score to settle. They do. They absolutely have a score to settle. And I think that there may be a little bit of non-Jedi teaching in there, a little of going against things that he's taught by the Jedi. But I don't know that I'd go so far as to say that it is the dark side mingling in there, because he still holds on to the teachings of the light that he has learned over the years, in the way that he fights, in the way that like he approaches her. He's still there are times when he can feel like it would be so much easier if he could just like wipe out this room and then go get her, but he doesn't. Or so many times that he can feel his anger building, but he doesn't. He's reserving it for her. And I think that there's something in that is not necessarily Jedi, also isn't the dark side. I hold on to what I said last time.
That's fair. I think what I see him as is, like, for me, he's not Anakin when he goes to kill all the Tuskens because his mother's died. He's more like Anakin when he kills that separatist general, as Obi-Wan and Satine are kind of, saying like, oh, what can we do? We can't kill him, but this and that, and Anakin just kills him. Like, I don't think that he is a servant of the dark side by any means, and I think he can still be pulled back. And Elzar coming back as well, I think all of this kind of chips away at Yoda's thought about, once you begin down that dark path, forever shall it dominate your destiny. It's a great line, but I think we're seeing it's not true. I guess maybe the better way to put it is, like the very phrase, a score to settle, feels very un-Jedi. And because it feels like attachment. Both attachment to like your personal vendetta against this person, but also a lot of it's because he believes that this general killed his sister. And that's also attachment. And I don't think we're going to see him becoming, a Dark Lord of the Sith by any means. But I think that, I do think that his story is there to show us that not everyone is as good at avoiding attachment while feeling powerful emotions as Elzar and Avar is.
Yeah, I think so too. I also think that they're like I said, at every moment that he could do something horrible, he doesn't. But your point about him needing things more than maybe the Jedi teachings lean towards is evident, because he has an opportunity to get rid of Weiss at the end of the book, but he lets her go because she says, I know where your sister is.
Right.
And he needs to know where she is. More than he needs Weiss dead, he needs to know what happened to Barish. And you're right, that is, like I said, like I think that he is probably the most of the Jedi we see in the High Republic book series, the most non-conforming Jedi, I think, is how I would maybe call it. But he does still very much like, I could never, I don't know that I could see him doing anything absolutely horrible.
Yeah. I think
And
that's
I
true.
think if he did, I mean, I think if he did, he wouldn't want to live with himself after that.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
feel like that from him. And he's lived a long life, he's prepared to die.
yeah,
So, and I think that that is why maybe he is allowing himself to do that,
hmm,
because he's expecting to die
yeah,
with it. So it's not like he has to be worried about what it's going to do to him because he'll be dead.
yeah. No, I think that's very fair. And like I said, I don't expect him to even get to Anakin with the Tusken levels of darksidedness.
Oh no,
But
yeah.
I do think that there's an extent to which he is like over on superhero ethics. We talk about this a lot of like the moment when the hero is presented with like you can save a large number of people or you can save this one person you really care about. And
Mhm.
most of the time, the hero finds a way to save both, but not always.
Yeah.
And it does feel to me like in this moment, Porter is saying, I know the rest of the Jedi are fighting this very important fight that so many people in the galaxy are counting on. I am
Mhm.
putting my personal mission above the mission that the Jedi are calling me towards.
Yeah.
And, again, it's not dark side yet, but it definitely feels to me more like a problematic attachment than Elzar and Avar.
Yeah. And I do like again I really think it circles around death, because when he comes
Yeah,
to at the beginning of Temptation of the Force, he was supposed to have died. He didn't
yeah,
expect to live. And so I wonder if, like, instead of viewing his life as a second chance at life, he's viewing it as a second chance to get Vice, which, as you said, is not is very
yeah,
not Jedi. But yeah, that's why I call it a non-conforming Jedi. I think is how I
yeah.
best explain him to myself.
I think when we read about him in the book, a lot of us, myself very much included, were like, "Oh, this is a Qui-Gon type," you know. And we talked about how the Jedi were always sort of looked at him as like this kooky old guy who was a great Jedi, but also was kind of a little off his rocker in some ways.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think it's really interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Danielle. This has been awesome. We're not going to have like a bonus member section. Everyone can still hear this, but we're going to keep that section about the acolyte towards the end. So for anyone who isn't sticking around, Danielle, where can people find you?
I'm on TikTok at Written in the Star Wars and Twitter at DannyS394. I talk a lot about Star Wars, obviously, but other media. Right now, I'm very obsessed with The Bear, but I also write reviews for Temple of Geek. So you can go over there and read some of my mostly Star Wars reviews.
Danielle, I promise you there's going to be a time when you mention an interest of yours that's not Star Wars, and I don't say, oh my God, I've been wanting someone I can podcast with that about. Unfortunately, today is not that day because we're now going to do a podcast about the bear at some point.
Please, I
But
have so much to say.
oh my God, me too, me too. If nothing else, I found a place in my town that does really good Italian beef sandwiches, and so my
No.
partner and I have just like we kind of just binge it, but anytime we're ready to sit down and binge it, we order Italian beef sandwiches
You have
because
to. You
just
have to.
how can you not? How can you not? All right. So with that, and of course, you're members already. I'm not going to sell you on membership, but please tell people about this podcast. Please send us feedback. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Whether or not you've read the book, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll discuss them at a later point. With that, let's enter a podcast section. Let's enter a spoiler section in 3, 2, 1. There are bigger issues to talk about, but everything you brought up about Buriyaga's POV and how great it was to see more of a Jedi Wookiee
Mhm.
makes me so frustrated that we got a Jedi Wookiee character who we killed off without him having any real interactions with any characters.
Yeah. I think we'll get the bulk of him in in what I assume is going to be a flashback. If probably not a full flashback episode like we had
Mm-hmm.
already, but in the flashbacks we get where we see what actually happened on Brindok.
Right.
Um, I think that's when we'll see the bulk of his character and come to understand it more. But yeah, it is a little. I think this is like the issue with such short seasons, and relatively short episodes. Now that like only the first two were like 40 minutes, um, is that we don't get to spend a lot of time in some of these places that aren't viewed as like absolutely imperative for the story. And it would have been nice to, when we have the end of, what is it, the end of episode 2, when we first see Kalnaka on Kofar, it would have been nice if, well, not episode 3 because that was a flashback, but the beginning of episode 4, say,
Mm-hmm.
spend the first like 5 minutes or 10 minutes a daily life with Kalnaka, or like, what is
Yeah.
he doing? Kind of extend that short scene we got at the end of episode 2, so we could at least see. Um, and maybe by the time the season's over, I won't feel that much like that it was needed that much, because maybe we will have
Mm-hmm.
gotten a sufficient amount of him. But yeah, I think I don't have a ton of issues with Acolyte. I really don't. But all of my criticisms so far circle around time of the episodes, like timing of the episodes, the amount of
Yeah.
time that they have. I was just so disappointed to get to episode 4 and have it be 30 minutes long. I think I looked, it was like
Yeah.
27 minutes of screen time that we got, not including
Especially
credits.
because I think we've now had it confirmed, or if not very strongly suggested, that episodes 4 and 5 were originally written to be one episode. And I
Yeah.
think breaking them up into 2 added to a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration and stuff like that. But yeah, and I think all the things you brought up before about the point of view of Wookiee characters being hard to do, unless it's internal monologue, was really helpful and really
Mm-hmm.
is a part of this. Because I like this in terms of the alienness of the galaxy that they created. They have definitely, they've made it clear Wookiees, just their vocal cords make it impossible for them to
Mm-hmm.
form human sounding words, with a
Yeah.
few exceptions in weird places. But like having them speak to Yoda in subtitles in Revenge of the Sith wasn't the best, but I think it worked. And I
Yeah.
would have loved to have at least a little bit of, that group of Jedi, both in the flashbacks, but then also in the like, hey, someone's trying to kill all of us, talking to
Mm-hmm.
him a little bit more and just exploring that further. So I'm hopeful for
Yeah.
the flashbacks like you are.
Yeah.
The bigger thing I want to talk about is Luminara, because you and I did an episode about how Luminara in The Acolyte is a very different character than what we
Do
saw
you
of her
mean
in the.
Indara?
No,
Oh, Vernestra.
Vernestra. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names.
Vernestra. No,
Okay,
it's okay. I was like,
okay,
wait,
okay.
Luminara. That was a bit of a divergence, but yeah, okay.
But the bigger thing I think to talk about here is Venestra, the character of Venestra, because you and I did an episode last week, or a few weeks ago now, probably, about The Acolyte episodes 1 through 4, and we talked about how Venestra felt like a fairly different character than what we knew of her from the High Republic, but that is entirely possible that, the events going on in those books helped to transition her in those ways. And I think I kept thinking about that as I was reading this book, because first of all, she goes head to head with Marchion Ro and
Yeah.
really kind of gets a picture of the just madness that is happening with him in a way that I think is really like terrifying to her, because she's used to threats that make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But also she deals with the fear creation of these creatures, the nameless. I think Buryaga probably deals with it the most, but Luminara is definitely in the top 3 or 4. So what do you kind of think of what we learned about her character in this, and how it might also line up with what we're seeing about her in The Acolyte?
Yeah. Well, first of all, episode 4, I believe it was where, like, one of my notes was this was the most that she's felt like book Vernestra. Like, watching her in episode 4 felt like reading her on the page in the High Republic book series.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically when she's talking one-on-one with Soul. Um, and a lot of that was the acting, like the portrayal of her visually and how I imagine her in my head when I'm reading her, but also just how her prime concern here is that she's just worried of the things she's scared of, the things she doesn't know, the things that people have been keeping from her, and she's worried about the safety of the Jedi
Yeah.
and what this new danger could mean to them, so much so that she's like, we don't want it to get outside of the order. So we can't tell the High Council, because the High Council will have to tell the Senate, and we don't want anyone who is not a Jedi to know what is happening, because what could that do to us? Like, what could that enable people to do to us? And I see that so heavily in the Vernestra that we have in the books right now, because she has seen firsthand, experienced firsthand that level of all-encompassing fear and what someone who isn't a Jedi can still do to the Jedi. And it does not surprise me that, assuming that it gets slightly worse before it gets better for her, that era of the High Republic, that she would grow up into someone who will do anything to ensure that that does not happen again.
Yeah.
And when there's a threat from the outside, want to nip it in the bud as fast and as quietly as possible. And so I see like episode 4 truly was the like, this I understand now. Like I understood a little bit before, I could see where it was going, but with that I was like, this is book Vernestra. This is we are seeing the consequences of what she had to deal with when she was younger.
Yeah. I think it's very true, and even more so after. For me, I don't think I really got that clicked into place until I read this book. And it may also be because, as I've said, I think a lot of people love this, and maybe it's because I'm listening on tape often, and just sort of my failure as a reader. When you have a book that's kind of like multiple characters, each having their own plot lines, and they're sort of interconnecting, but you're trying to follow 8 or 9 different storylines, is often very difficult for me. And I think I didn't really latch on to Vernestra, except while reading this book, because I already knew about her character from The Acolyte, I was kind of maybe paying more attention. But either way, one thing I think that comes out of all the stuff you discussed is there's often in movies, and often this is about cops or soldiers, but often it can be about reporters or scientists or anyone else, where your main characters are the people on the ground, the people dealing with the problems, and every now and then they have to report back to their bosses. And you kind of get the sense that like their bosses are not really the greatest, and they're kind of out of touch, and they're a little bit like overly stuffy. And granted, we're getting it from the point of view of people who are dealing with them. I very much got that impression about the Jedi Council in this book, like that Elzar and Vernestra and a couple of the others are kind of like they don't necessarily like they respect individual masters and their wisdom very, very much, but there's also sort of a sense like it kind of feels like, the council is just going to get in the way. We can handle this ourselves. In a way that I think really lines up with where she gets to in The Acolyte.
Yeah, and I think she specifically says, doesn't she, to Belle and Buryaga, the council don't know everything. They're not going to have an answer for you, like what you want. They're not going to understand this any better than you do. Like I think it's Buryaga fretting over how to explain how he killed the Nameless, one of the Nameless, and that he worries that he'll say the wrong thing or he'll describe it imperfectly or whatever. The council get the wrong idea, and Vernestra's like, they don't know about this any better than you do. Like you are the expert in this because you felt it, like you experienced it. Explain it how you want to. At the end of the day, they're just people like us, and they're doing their best, but they're not perfect. They're not infallible. And Belle and Buryaga are kind of like, oh, what? And she's like, it's true. And I was like, oh, Vernestra. Stellan would have been like, what? But it's true. And you're right, because she is the same in what we saw in episode 4, especially the Acolyte, of her being, like I said, we can't tell the High Council this because they'll tell the Senate. She sees their weaknesses. She sees what they're tied up in that they maybe shouldn't be. And she's taking this into her own hands.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. I think you're exactly right. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation, Danielle. As always, thank you so much to our members. Thanks. Thank you so much. We make all this possible. We are definitely going to have a lot more to say on more books and more things. And if they kill off either Elzar or Avon, Avon, I hope not. But if we kill Elzar or Avar, I'm rioting, certainly. I don't know if you are, Danielle.
I'll cry.
Yeah, that's fair too. All right. Thank you all so much. We have spoken.